Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Well Workplaces podcast. I'm Tom Bosner, and today I'm catching up with Jane Homberger, who's the CEO of SkinSmart Australia. SkinSmart Australia is a skin cancer assessment business that proudly assesses about tens of thousands of Australians every year in corporate workplaces. They specialise in skin cancer consultancy for GPs and establish mole mapping services within those practices. They also work on training and development of these services in this specialised field. Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tom, for inviting me to join you today. I do love any excuse to discuss the importance of protecting ourselves from the hazards of the Australian sun. So thank you.
Well, great to have you on the show. And for context for the listeners, Jane and I know each other. We're colleagues in some ways, and yeah, we're really both passionate about educating people on the benefits of skin checks and looking after your health and health screenings and that kind of thing. So today I'm really interested in, I guess, Jane maybe telling me a little bit more about your background in this area, because I don't know the full story, and also how you got into establishing SkinSmart Australia. I'm sure that's a good story.
So my background is actually in nursing, and I moved into skin cancer medicine around 14 years ago. It was actually quite by accident that it happened. I had a mole map appointment within one of the largest skin cancer clinics in Australia at the time, and I was approached by the owner to join their team. So it was after that I completed my formal postgraduate qualifications in skin cancer medicine, and which is actually called dermoscopy. And dermoscopy is the study of both benign and malignant skin lesions on the body. So after working there for a few years, I did find that there was a very big gap in the industry, and that most Australians weren't having regular skin cancer screening checks. So if someone did notice a change in one of their moles, or let's call them skin spots for today, in one of their skin spots, it was common for them to perhaps, if they had time, go and visit their GP and have just a spot check. And that was very, very dangerous, mainly because 9 times out of 10, that spot was absolutely fine. But those people may have suspicious lesions on their body elsewhere, but they weren't getting checked at all. So we decided that we would approach corporate companies in Australia to go into their businesses and promote skin cancer screening as part of their health and wellness services. So it was 2012 that we did establish SkinSmart, and we were one of the first companies in Australia to solely specialise in skin cancer screening. So over the past 10 years or so, we have built up a reputation of being one of the premier companies offering skin cancer screening to Australian workers.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny how you just sort of accidentally fell into the space, and I guess that's kind of how a lot of things happen with business, and kind of just falling into it, or spotting a bit of a niche. Why we do spend about a third of our lives at work, and obviously the last couple of years have been a bit disrupted with workplaces and people going into workplaces. But why did you think of targeting the workplace as the avenue to do these skin checks?
Well, obviously, as I said, it did become very apparent that people weren't taking the time out of their busy lifestyles to specifically go and have a full body skin assessment. So we realized that obviously it was very convenient for them. If we came to the workplace, they didn't have to take the time out of their working day to go and get a skin check. And also, we found that the people were very confused about sourcing an appropriate location to have a thorough skin check. and a professional full body skin check at that. So this was putting a lot of people off, and they were then putting off having their skin checked. And, you know, we likened it a bit at the time to having a dentist appointment for a checkup. It's something that we do tend to put off and put off and put off. And before we know it, our 6-monthly dental check has blown out to a 2-yearly, 3-yearly dental check. So it was the same thing with skin checks, except that people just weren't getting them done full stop. And like I said, they just didn't know where to go. So I suppose I could explain a little bit about how a skin check works in the workplace, and that might make people aware of sort of how simple it is. So staff members can actually feel quite confident that their health and wellness department have performed, I suppose you call it, their due diligence in selecting qualified and experienced practitioners to facilitate these workplace skin checks. So number one, they can relax and know that the people that are coming into their workplace know what they're doing. So each staff member undergoes a risk assessment for their risk of being diagnosed with skin cancer or melanoma in the future. This takes the form of a verbal questionnaire and also observations by the dermatoscopist. So the outcome of this risk assessment is based on multiple factors. So that can include your skin type, your personal and your family history. Your lifetime sun exposure is really, really important, including if you've ever used a solarium. And it's quite surprising how many people, when you do question them, have actually used a solarium in their past. And quite often they're very embarrassed to admit it. But look, it is incredible how many people did use them in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s before they were banned throughout Australia. We also look at the number of moles a person has on their body and the type of moles they have, which is also very important. And one thing that people don't think about is the immunity status of a person as well. So if someone is on immunocompromised medication, that can really increase their risk. And so that's something that we'll look at. And we put all those factors together to come up with their risk. And it's so important for someone to understand their risk because they then know with any health illness, but specifically with skin cancer, they know what they have to do to protect themselves. So in addition to understanding their risk for skin cancer, every staff member is then educated on sun safety practices for prevention, self-screening, which is really, really important, and understanding what to look at on their own skin. So then if the dermatoscopist does find something during that appointment on the staff member's skin that they feel is suspicious and needs to be investigated further, they will then recommend that person goes and sees their regular GP to have it looked at. We do often get told that the staff member doesn't have a regular GP, which we find is a huge issue in Australia. And we then give them some tips for finding a good GP to go and see. So obviously all these factors in this appointment go to a better understanding, I suppose, of skin cancer and their own skin type.
Yeah, that's great to go into the details of that assessment and how it kind of works. I guess as well with we know the Australian sun's pretty horrible, and the stats for the melanoma in Australia are pretty horrific as well. Do you have any data to share on those population stats with regards to melanoma in Australia or skin cancer?
Yeah, well, look, most people would probably be aware at this stage that melanoma or Australia has the highest rate of melanoma in the entire world. And we have one of the highest rates of skin cancer as well. So there is a difference between melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancers. But looking at melanoma, which is the least common but the most dangerous type of skin cancer, Australia is number one, unfortunately. It's something we don't really want to be number one in. But one thing we do find when we work throughout Australia as a nation is that we see different types of skin depending on where we are in Australia. So things that will make a difference is the location of the business that we're working in, the industry type, and also one of the most important things is the childhood sun exposure. So, for example, in the northern states, we can find as many as 30% of the people that we're screening will have a suspicious lesion or suspicious skin spot, while in the southern states, it is generally lower. So if we were to explain that further, we generally find a much higher percentage of suspicious spots the further north we travel. Obviously, the states where the UV index is above 3, for much of the year, there is a much greater risk of individuals having excessive exposure throughout their lives. So keep in mind that it is recommended that at 3 or higher as a UV index, people should be using those 5 S's of sun protection. So slip, slop, slap, seek, slide. Interestingly, though, Hobart has an average over the year UV index throughout the year of 5. So even Hobart, as our coldest state, still averages well above what we regard as a safe UV index for us to just be going outside unprotected. So then we look at, say, Adelaide, Melbourne and Canberra, and they have an average UV index of 6. Which is considered a high index, while Sydney and Perth at 7 are even higher, and Brisbane is very high with 8. Darwin has actually got the highest average UV index of 11, which is considered extreme. So when we do go up to the Northern Territory, we do expect to find a great deal of suspicious skin lesions. Moving on to the different types of businesses that we do see, we see a much greater incidence in industries where they have outdoor workers. So, and even more so for the older outdoor workers, as they've spent a great deal of their lives working in the sun, and during the years where very little was known about the danger of the sun in Australia. Having said that, however, when we do assess people who have an inside desk job, we do often find people that have that spend a large proportion of their week in outdoor pursuits. So that could include surfing or bike riding or playing a lot of golf, and this does obviously place them at a much higher risk for skin cancer as well. So I suppose my final point is about childhood and adolescent sun exposure. It does play a huge role in that person's risk. And even growing up in the southern states of Australia, where the UV levels are lower, multiple sunburns as a child will contribute to skin cancer damage and potential skin cancers throughout their lives.
Yeah, well, lots of info there and awesome insights. The UV index in all the different states makes sense, but the surprising one there was Hobart being quite high. I do remember I've been to Hobart a few times over some different summers, and remember feeling like shit. It's really like I felt like the sun had a little bit of bite in it for sure. Yeah, one interesting thing as well is around the office workers. I guess you would think, naturally, the industries must just all be outdoors. But those people that are indoors or normally in offices, they're normal humans. They do get out and do different things on the weekend. It's probably maybe also because they're not outdoors as much. Maybe they're not as sun smart, perhaps compared to their outdoor sort of colleagues. Jane, I'm wondering, it's kind of been an interesting time for, as I said before, like workplaces. A lot of people have had to put off their health checks or their normal routine care, things like dentists, as you mentioned at the start. skin checks has probably fallen off people's priority list, but maybe it's coming back, over the next 6 months. You also mentioned as well, it's kind of like the dentist in that, you need to go every 6 months, but it's pretty easy, especially during a pandemic, to push things out. And then before you know it, it's 2 years. And I know in our business at Pinnacle, we found that people are pretty much almost 2 years apart from their different checks. I'm wondering if you're based on sort of that trend of pushing things out. Do you have any predictions or have any sort of ideas around what might happen in the coming year with regards to skin cancer rates? Is it expected to go up because people haven't checked themselves, or do you have anything to say there?
Yeah, look, everything you're saying is so correct, Tom, and it is concern, especially for those people that are in that higher risk category. We've sort of been given a bit of a get out of jail free card, as in, stay at home, it's fine, you don't have to do anything, protect yourselves. But, these sort of things have definitely been forgotten. And unfortunately, with the onset of the pandemic, we've all put off our health checks. And whether it is for skin cancer detection or any other recommended health screening services, delaying them could be life-threatening. So, that goes for breast screening. It goes for absolutely everything that we are recommended to, the bowel screening, everything that we're recommended to do throughout our lives. So as with many health issues that we can suffer from, early detection, diagnosis and treatment is the key for a much, much better health outcome. So it is especially true of skin cancer and particularly melanoma with this. So just to put it into perspective for you, if melanoma is diagnosed at its earliest stage, and that's when it's localized and it's first growing in the skin and it's in that very, very top layer of the epidermis, and once it's biopsied and it's found that there's no evidence of spread, there is a 99% chance of a person surviving beyond that 5-year mark. Unfortunately, once a melanoma has advanced to, we call it the level 4, and that's when it has traveled through the bloodstream and the lymph system to other parts of the body, and we call it metastasizing. So it's grown elsewhere in the body. The survival rate suddenly drops right down to 26%. So, I mean, that is massive, and that can happen within 12 months of a melanoma first appearing. And I don't want to scare everyone out there, but it is the statistics and it is what can happen. So, this can be the difference between having a regular skin check and delaying it, beyond that 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. So now that people have or are starting to return to their workplace, it's really time to start reintroducing those life-saving screening services if we can.
Yeah, well, that stat there on the, that drop in, I guess it's a survival, you call it a survival rate, down to that 20-something percent, 26%. It's a big difference, and that's where that regular check, isn't it? That 6 months apart kind of thing is really important. Obviously, that's huge. If you really let it go for a year, there's obviously a big, a big chance that you're missing something. And personally, we've even in the last month, I've got some friends and some friends of friends where that's been the case, where things haven't gone that well for them, and and it's not looking very good. So really great to, I guess, bring this to everyone's attention on the podcast, because I think, like if you haven't done any of your normal health screenings, now's the time. We can't let this pandemic hold us up for forever, especially when our well-being is clearly the most important thing. Jane, I'm just wondering if there's any, I guess when we talk about looking after our skin, there's obviously some simple tips that people can kind of deploy now for themselves. We're kind of in Australia now at the moment where we're at the end of summer. It's been a pretty warm one. What are some of the tips that you might give someone that's coming to you, or someone that's had a check and you're kind of sending them on their way? They're okay, but they need to keep going with what they're doing.
Okay, as you can probably imagine, Tom, this is something that I love talking about. So please just shut me down when you have
No, go for it.
So look, the most important thing that you can do for yourself is to incorporate skin self-examination into your healthcare regime. So we do recommend that you do this about every 3 months. It needs to include all areas of your skin, even in areas that have never been exposed to the sun, because melanomas are very nasty things, and they can grow anywhere, including the scalp, under a thick head of hair, the soles of the feet, between the toes. So if you can ask a partner, a family member or friend to help you assist in areas that you can't see, where you know that you have got some skin spots, that is a fabulous idea. Also, make use of your smartphone and take any photos of any lesions that you think have the potential to change. This is very, very important, because if you do go along to your GP after thinking that something has changed, you will be able to show your GP what the lesion did look like, and then the GP will be able to look through the instrument called the dermatoscope, which will show the minute features of a lesion. And it's very, very important that whoever's checking your skin is using an instrument called a dermatoscope, because you cannot see anything with the naked eye. But if you have those before and after photos, and then the GP is able to look through the dermatoscope, the GP will be able to see if there's suspicious features there. When we're seeing patients, we like to teach them how to check their own skin. So we use an algorithm that we use ourselves. It's a very, very basic algorithm. It's the ABCDE algorithm of checking your own skin. But just to run through it very, very quickly, A stands for asymmetry. Now, I know it's very hard to see with the naked eye when a tiny little skin spot, whether it's symmetrical or not, but the way that we do it is we divide it into 4 quadrants. And when we look through our dermatoscope, we look to make sure that those 4 quadrants are all identical. We're not talking about the shape. We actually talk about what's going on inside that skin spot. So we look for asymmetry. B is border. We don't like to see anything growing from the border. So if you can see with the naked eye some pigment that's growing as a line outside that border, that is a sign of growth, and we don't like to see that. So do take note of that. C is for color. The perfect skin spot will only have one color. So if you do note that a skin spot's developed a black pigment spot in it, or it may have developed some red or some white, or even some gray, we don't like to see that. So again, go along, see your GP. D is for diameter. We used to be taught that melanomas were generally 6 millimeters or larger. Now, we've learned that definitely is not the case. So what I would say about D being for diameter is they do come in all shapes and sizes. So remember that when you're looking at your skin spot. Just because something's tiny, if you think that it is changing, again, you need to get a second opinion on it. E is for evolution. Now, this refers to change of any type, and change is the key. Now, change is the key to all health issues, but again, specifically for skin cancer, if you see any change in size, color, changes to the spot, such as if all of a sudden it starts bleeding, that can be a major sign of a non-melanoma skin cancer. If you're towel drying your face and something starts to bleed, you may have a little skin cancer called a basal cell carcinoma. If something becomes itchy or sore, that's another thing to look out for. So in addition to your own regular skin assessments and seeing a skin cancer practitioner for a professional skin check, at least annually if you can, don't forget to always have sunscreen close at hand. As I mentioned earlier, it's specifically required for UV indexes of 3 or greater. And you can get the UV index from the SunSmart app, and you can program it for your location, and it will actually tell you what your index is for that day. So I do find people have a lot of concerns about what sunscreens are best for themselves and their families. What is really, really important to remember is that in Australia, the Therapeutic Goods Association, or TGA, will only approve ingredients in sunscreens that have been assessed for safety. So there are 2 main types of sunscreen that we find on the shelves in pharmacies and supermarkets in Australia. First of all, we've got what I always refer to as the old-fashioned type of sunscreens, which is it's the chemical-based sunscreens. Those sunscreens work by absorbing the UV radiation. And what that does is it prevents your skin from absorbing those UV rays. Then we have the newer types of sunscreen, which are, we refer to them as the zinc-based sunscreens. And that's because the major ingredients in them is zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And the way they work is they reflect the sun away from the skin, and that protects you as well. Both work extremely efficiently in protecting the skin, but it's important to source and use an SPF 50, as this will protect you from 98% of the UV radiation. Also really, really important to reapply every 2 hours if you can, especially when swimming and exercising. There's been a lot of media over the last few years about certain sunscreens causing burning when they shouldn't have. The most important thing to remember is to reapply. I don't know if you've noticed when you go for a swim in the water and you come out and you find that the sunscreen's beaded on your skin. Once you grab the towel and wipe it off, it's gone. Do try and reapply. There are just a couple more things that I want to add about sunscreen, and that is, make sure you check the use by date. Super duper important. Don't use sunscreen while you're using insect repellent that contains a chemical called DEET, because it will make the sunscreen ineffective. And finally, sunscreen will go off if it overheats to over 25 degrees. So whatever you do not keep your sunscreen in the glove box of the car. I know it's handy, but it will overheat so quickly. I mean, I suppose the only other thing that I'd add, if we've got time, Tom, is just about vitamin D. I don't know if you...
keep going. Yeah, this is great info.
But, you know, there is a huge problem in Australia with our vitamin D levels. And the darker our skin type, the more likely we are to have low vitamin D levels. And that's because the melanin, which is the cells in our skin, in darker skin types, we have more of those melanin cells. And what that means is the more melanin cells we've got, the better protected we are from the sun. But because of that, the less vitamin D we have. So the way that the vitamin D is produced is the UV radiation hits our skin, and a chemical reaction occurs from the UV radiation where our body does produce vitamin D. And it's that vitamin D that helps our body absorb calcium, which is necessary for healthy bones and muscles. And that, of course, includes the heart. So the most important thing to know about having enough UV radiation for enough vitamin D is that we need it regularly. We need it daily. Going on an amazing 3-week holiday in the middle of winter in the sun is not going to give us enough vitamin D to last us throughout the year. It doesn't work like that. Our bodies can only manufacture enough vitamin D at a time. So remember, if you are concerned about your vitamin D levels, it's so easy to go and visit your GP. You'll get a referral for some pathology tests, and if it's required, your GP will just prescribe you a supplement that will help. So the bottom line in this is it's not worth risking your skin health to achieve the adequate vitamin D levels.
Yeah, that's really interesting on vitamin D. I think a lot of people just need, they try and get out more. And like you said, if you're coming from Victoria, you go on a sunny holiday in winter and you think you're kind of good to go. So yeah, it makes sense to consult a GP for supplementing if you need to. Jane, thanks so much for your all the interesting information there. I guess the main thing out of today is just, from my learning anyway, is that most people, I think, have dropped the ball on their health screenings, and it's a really important time to kind of get back into that routine for their own health and well-being. And the workplace has a great opportunity or responsibility as well to look after their staff. So this is a nice reminder, I think, for me as well, to kind of reconsider skin checks as part of the workplace programs. Jane, thanks so much. You're a legend.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate you asking me to do this, Tom. As you can tell, I love talking about it. So I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No worries.